It was the year 1976. Spring in Moscow may have brought the first tentative blossoms, but in the offices of the Lubyanka, the atmosphere was far from springtime serenity. Behind heavy doors, within walls that remembered countless secrets, an operation was brewing that would come to be known by the code name Toucan. The head of the State Security Committee in those years was Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov, a man known for his insight and ability to see far beyond the horizon of current events. It was he, according to many historians, who personally authorized this ambitious and highly delicate operation. Andropov did not like half measures. If he took on a task, he saw it through to the end, so that the enemy would feel the full force of the blow. The main target of Toucan was Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, whose name had already become synonymous with cruelty and repression in certain circles. The task set before the intelligence officers was very specific. It was not a matter of directly recruiting agents within his entourage or organizing any armed actions. No, the goal was something else: his international discrediting. It was necessary to create an image of a cruel tyrant and ruthless violator of human rights in the eyes of the world community. This was part of a larger strategy known as the KGB's active measures, designed not only to weaken the positions of the Soviet Union's opponents, but also to isolate those countries whose regimes were considered anti-communist. The KGB believed that information could be a powerful tool of pressure. As noted by the prominent British historian Christopher Andrew, who has devoted many years to studying the activities of intelligence services, analyzing such operations, Andropov understood that information is a weapon more powerful than bullets. Indeed, a bullet kills one person, but a well-directed wave of information can undermine confidence in an entire state, deprive it of support, and even provoke internal unrest. The task was to set this mechanism in motion and make it work without leaving any direct traces. When it came to creating a convincing image, the KGB had a very specific and, as practice showed, effective tool at its disposal: document fabrication. This was not just forgery, it was an art that required extraordinary skill, thorough knowledge of details, and, of course, a certain amount of cynicism. This method became key to Operation Toucan. Imagine how, somewhere in a quiet printing house, somewhere in the depths of secret laboratories, under the careful supervision of specialists, a document was created that was supposed to blow up the information space. The KGB created a fake letter. It was composed in such a way as to look completely authentic, with all the necessary attributes: a seal, a signature, and the style characteristic of official correspondence of those years. Allegedly, this letter was written by Pinochet himself to the Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza. Two names, two regimes, which, in the minds of many, were associated with authoritarian rule, were supposed to exchange some secret plans. The content of this fake message described in detail plans to neutralize political opponents abroad. In other words, it referred to certain conspiracies and secret operations directed against Chilean dissidents who had found refuge in other countries. The aim was to show that the Pinochet regime would stop at nothing, even beyond its borders, to deal with those who were displeasing to it. But how did such fakes get into the right hands? After all, direct transmission from the Soviet special services would have been too obvious and would have aroused suspicion. This is where a subtle game, a kind of multi-step combination, came into play. These documents were not distributed directly, but through friendly journalists. Such people could be found in the United States and European countries. They were the ones who were always looking for a scoop, who were eager to reveal the truth, especially if that truth corresponded to their own beliefs. Many of them, sympathizing with leftist ideas, had already criticized Pinochet and his regime. They believed they had obtained irrefutable evidence of his cruelty. For the most part, these journalists published the materials without even suspecting their true source. For them, it was simply an anonymous source, an insider who had provided them with exclusive information. And so, after some time, Pinochet must have wondered where all these stories were coming from, which seemed to have fallen on him out of nowhere, like a meteorite from the sky, and even with his own signature. The KGB officers responsible for fabricating the documents paid attention to every detail. The type of paper, watermarks, even characteristic typos, if any were known. It was painstaking work that required not only technical skills, but also a deep understanding of psychology. The calculation was that, seeing such convincing evidence, journalists would not conduct a thorough investigation, since it confirmed their own prejudices. This created the illusion of irrefutability, methodically undermining confidence in the Chilean regime. It was these forgeries that shaped public opinion, like drops of water slowly but surely eroding a stone. It would seem that such deception could not go unnoticed. In an age when information did not spread as rapidly as it does today, and it was much more difficult to verify its accuracy, the line between truth and fiction could be very thin. The mechanism of active measures worked without a hitch. The fabricated documents spread like a virus across the information field. Soon, the campaign reached a global scale, and that is no exaggeration. Stories planted by friendly journalists about alleged atrocities committed by the Chilean Secret Service DINA began to appear in the pages of the world's most influential publications. Among them were such giants as the American New York Times and the British Times. These newspapers, with their enormous authority and millions of readers, unwittingly became mouthpieces for Soviet disinformation. Imagine how early in the morning, somewhere in London or New York, people unfold the fresh newspaper over a cup of coffee. On the front pages are headlines about new revelations from Chile, about Pinochet's secret plans, about the persecution of dissidents. Readers, unaware of the true source, believed every word because it was written by respected publications. Dozens, even hundreds of reprints of these materials in smaller but no less influential regional newspapers and magazines created a real wave of negativity. This wave, growing stronger, formed a stable public opinion in the West directed strictly against Augusto Pinochet and his regime. The goal was achieved. The image of Pinochet as a ruthless tyrant who would stop at nothing to crush his opponents became deeply rooted in the minds of the Western public. The success of Operation Toucan was clear proof that even without directly recruiting classic agents, those who pass on secret information or carry out sabotage, the KGB could effectively manipulate global consciousness. All it took was skillful use of the media, playing on existing prejudices and feeding carefully prepared information through seemingly independent sources. This was a new level of information warfare where the weapons were not tanks and planes, but words and images disseminated through newspapers, radio, and television. For those who grew up in the Soviet Union, where the press was under strict control, the very idea of manipulating information was not foreign. But in the West, where there was an illusion of freedom of speech, such methods worked particularly effectively, as people were less prepared for being deceived through familiar and seemingly reliable sources of information. It was this belief in the independence of the media that became the very weak spot that the Soviet special services skillfully exploited. Operation Toucan became one of the most striking examples of how the reputation of an entire state could be undermined using only information tools. It was a kind of invisible battle where the stakes were not territory, but the minds and hearts of millions of people. As we know, everything that is secret sooner or later becomes known. And so, many years later, when the world had already forgotten about the Chilean forgeries and the Cold War was coming to its logical conclusion, the truth about Operation Toucan came to light. And this happened thanks to one man, Vasily Mitrokhin. Mitrokhin was far from being an illegal intelligence agent or an undercover agent who infiltrated enemy networks. He was, at first glance, an ordinary employee of the Archives Department of the First Chief Directorate of the KGB, which was responsible for foreign intelligence. His job was to systematize and catalog secret documents stored in the committee's archives. The job seemed boring and routine, but it gave him access to a huge amount of information that was intended for a limited circle of people. As it turned out, Mitrokhin had been engaged in an incredibly dangerous activity for years, day after day. He did not just read these secret papers, he copied them. No, not on a photocopier, which were not yet widely available at the time, and certainly not on a camera. He manually rewrote the most important and sensational documents word for word in ordinary school notebooks. He copied thousands of pages, writing down everything that seemed important to him. The names of agents, details of operations, KGB working methods. These notebooks, filled with microscopic handwriting, were his personal, carefully hidden archive. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the Iron Curtain fell and the old foundations crumbled, Vasily Mitrokhin made a decision that changed his life forever and influenced the understanding of the history of the Cold War. In 1992, he took his priceless notes to the West. It was a real feat, fraught with enormous risk. How he managed to do it remains his personal secret, but the fact remains, these notebooks, equivalent in volume to many volumes, ended up in the hands of British intelligence. It was then that the eminent British historian Christopher Andrew became involved in working with these materials. He spent years painstakingly studying and systematizing these handwritten notes. The result of his titanic labor was 2 books, co-authored with Mitrokhin, The Sword and the Shield and The Mitrokhin Archive. These books, published in 1999 and 2005 respectively, caused a sensation in the world of intelligence and history. They exposed many secret KGB operations, including, of course, Operation Toucan. Andrew emphasized the exceptional importance of this archive in his works. He wrote, "Without Mitrokhin, the world would never have known the extent of this disinformation." And that was the absolute truth. Before the Mitrokhin archive appeared, many of these operations, including Toucan, remained mere guesses, rumors, or unconfirmed suspicions. The archive became the key to understanding the methods of Soviet intelligence, its scale and depth of penetration into the global information space. It showed how far the special services went in their desire to influence events, using not only direct force, but also subtle, almost invisible threads of manipulation. The story of Vasily Mitrokhin is not just a tale of exposing secrets. It is the story of a man who, being part of the system, at some point decided that the truth was more important than secrecy. He risked everything so that the world would learn how one of the most powerful intelligence services in history operated. Operation Toucan is not just a story of espionage, but a lesson in the power of information. It showed how the KGB, avoiding direct recruitment, used cunning to influence world politics.